The courtroom fell into stunned silence. All eyes were on the black woman standing before the judge, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the scorn that had been directed at her just moments earlier. Judge Luis Davis, infamous for his iron grip on the city's legal proceedings and his thinly veiled contempt for anyone he deemed beneath him, had spent the last 20 minutes berating her, mocking her for daring to represent a worthless community center case in his court. "You think you can waste this court's time," he had sneered, his laughter echoing through the room. "Ain't nobody playing dress-up as an attorney. This is a courtroom, young lady, not a charity shop." But then she spoke. In a voice steady and clear, she began dismantling the prosecution's case. Her knowledge of property law and her razor-sharp arguments left the judge and the seasoned corporate lawyers in the room dumbfounded. Gasps rippled through the audience as it became apparent that this unassuming woman was no ordinary community advocate. The judge's smug expression faded, replaced by confusion and growing unease. "I object," one of the corporate attorneys interrupted, his face red with frustration. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe this individual is not who she claims to be. Welcome back, my amazing family. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your love and support mean the world, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get right into the story." The woman turned her piercing gaze toward the attorney and smiled faintly. "Your Honor, I can provide my credentials if necessary, but I assure you, every word I've spoken is legally sound. Shall we continue?" Judge Davis's face had turned a deep shade of crimson. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of his disbelief. The woman reached into her satchel, pulled out a pristine document, and handed it to the bailiff. The paper was passed up to the judge. As he read it, his hands trembled. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The audience waited, breathless. Now let us go back to where it all began. The beginning. The story started in the gritty neighborhoods on the city's south side, where Marie Gilmore worked out of a cramped legal aid office with peeling paint and flickering lights. Marie was no ordinary attorney. She had been a child prodigy, reading law books for fun by the age of 7 and arguing mock trials against law professors by 12. Despite her brilliance, she chose to keep a low profile, uninterested in the prestige that came with her credentials. Years ago, after dismantling a major criminal network in another state, she had learned the hard way that visibility came with a target on your back. So she worked under an alias, took cases no one else wanted, and kept her real identity buried. Her mentor, a retired civil rights attorney named Malcolm Reed, often reminded her of the importance of strategy and using her gifts where they mattered most. "The system protects itself, Marie," he would say. "You have to be smarter than the corruption, not just louder." One evening, while reviewing case files at a community center that provided free legal services, Marie overheard a conversation that would change everything. An elderly woman named Dolores was in tears, explaining to the center's director that she and 30 other tenants were being evicted from their building. "We've paid every cent on time," Dolores sobbed, her voice breaking. "But they say we violated our lease. It's not true. They just want us gone so they can tear it down and build condos." Marie's instincts kicked in. She approached Dolores after the conversation and asked what happened. Dolores explained that a company called Harmony Solutions had purchased the building and was using fabricated lease violations to force everyone out. The eviction notices were full of legal jargon designed to intimidate people into leaving without a fight. "They're lying because they want the land," Dolores insisted, her hands shaking. "Nobody cares about us." Marie's mind raced. She asked Dolores if she had copies of the lease, payment records, and the eviction notice. Dolores nodded and said she had everything stored in a folder at home. Marie felt a spark of determination ignite inside her. "Let me help you," she said firmly. "I think you have a case." Dolores looked at her in disbelief. "But who are you?" "I mean, thank you, but do you really think you can fight them?" Marie smiled softly. "I've been told I can't do a lot of things. Trust me." Over the next 2 weeks, Marie pored over the documents. The more she dug, the more the pieces fell into place. Harmony Solutions was a shell company. The ownership structure was deliberately obscure, but one name kept appearing in the paperwork: a law firm that had handled multiple real estate acquisitions throughout the city, all presided over by the same judge. Judge Luis Davis. Marie's pulse quickened. She had heard rumors about Davis. Whispers in legal circles about cases that settled too quickly, defense attorneys who never quite put up a fight, prosecutors who seemed to know when to push and when to back off. But no one had ever been able to prove anything. Davis was untouchable, a fixture in the courthouse who wielded his gavel like a weapon. Marie decided to take the case herself. She would represent the tenants, but she would do it quietly, using her low-profile alias. She needed to see how deep the corruption ran before revealing her hand. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The quiet attorney who always kept her head down was taking on a powerful developer, and the case would be heard in Judge Davis's courtroom. Local activists showed up to the first hearing. Some questioned whether one lawyer could make a difference. Others mocked the idea of a woman they had never heard of taking on the machine. As the court date approached, Dolores became increasingly anxious. "What if we lose?" she asked Marie one night. "What if he just throws the case out? I don't have money for appeals or anything." Marie reassured her, but deep down, she knew the stakes were higher than Dolores realized. This was not just about saving a building. It was about exposing a network of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight. And if Davis was who she suspected he was, this case could put her directly in the crosshairs of the city's most dangerous power broker. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters covering the community angle, and even a few curious lawyers had come to watch. Marie, dressed in a plain navy blazer and carrying a worn leather satchel, walked to the plaintiff's table with quiet confidence. But as soon as she stood to introduce herself, Judge Luis Davis interrupted her. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm representing the plaintiffs, Your Honor," Marie replied calmly. The judge leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You must be joking. Did one of the law schools send you here as a field trip?" The room filled with whispers and stifled laughter. Marie stood firm, her expression unchanging. Judge Davis continued to ridicule her, questioning her qualifications and making remarks about how people who didn't understand the law shouldn't waste the court's time. He made pointed comments about her appearance, her blazer, even the way she spoke. Marie endured it all silently, waiting for her moment. When the opportunity finally came, she presented her case with surgical precision. She cited property statutes, exposed inconsistencies in the eviction notices, and systematically dismantled the corporate attorney's arguments. The room grew quiet as she spoke, her words commanding attention and respect. But the moment that left everyone speechless was when the corporate attorney, flustered and desperate, accused her of misrepresenting her credentials. "Your Honor," the attorney stammered, "I move to have this woman removed. She has no business practicing law in this court." Marie smiled faintly and reached into her satchel. She pulled out a pristine document and handed it to the bailiff. "Your Honor, I believe this will clarify any confusion." The bailiff passed the document to Judge Davis. As he read it, his face went pale. His hands began to tremble. The paper detailed Marie Gilmore's credentials: a licensed attorney who had passed the bar at 19, worked as a federal prosecutor for 5 years, and led the dismantling of 2 major organized crime operations in other jurisdictions. Her name had been in the news. Her cases had set precedents. She was not some community volunteer playing lawyer, she was one of the most accomplished criminal prosecutors in the country, working undercover to protect herself from retaliation. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Judge Davis's gavel slammed against the bench. "This court is adjourned for a 10-minute recess," he stammered, his voice shaking. Marie's eyes followed him as he retreated to his chambers, and a small smile crept across her face. This was only the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with chatter as the recess began. Spectators leaned toward one another, whispering about the attorney who had just stunned the judge and the defense team alike. Some marveled at her poise. Others were skeptical, insisting that this had to be some kind of setup. Marie remained seated at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly together. Despite her composed exterior, her heart raced. She had revealed her credentials, a bold move, but it had come with risks. Now there was no turning back. Judge Davis knew who she was, and if he was connected to the people she suspected, her cover was blown. Dolores leaned toward her, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Marie, are you sure we're going to win this? They're acting like you're some kind of threat." Marie turned to her, her voice steady. "They're acting that way because they're afraid. The truth is on our side, Dolores. Trust me." Before Dolores could respond, the bailiff announced the judge's return. The room fell silent as Judge Luis Davis re-entered, his face an unreadable mask. He took his seat and cleared his throat. "This court will now resume," he said, his voice firmer than before. His gaze shifted toward Marie, but the arrogance from earlier had vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous: calculation. "Ms. Gilmore," he said slowly, testing her name on his tongue. "Let's proceed." Marie Gilmore's love affair with the law began in the most unlikely of places, her grandmother's attic in Baltimore, surrounded by boxes of dusty legal textbooks that had belonged to her late grandfather. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with curious eyes and a mind that absorbed information like a sponge. While other children were reading fairy tales, Marie was decoding the language of contracts and constitutional law, fascinated by the way words could be weapons or shields depending on who wielded them. Her grandmother, Evelyn, a retired paralegal who had spent 40 years working in civil rights law, noticed Marie's unusual interest but didn't push it. She simply left the books where Marie could find them and watched as the girl devoured case after case, her small fingers tracing the margins where Evelyn's late husband had made notes decades earlier. By the time Marie was 12, she was correcting her middle school teachers on points of law they referenced in civics class. By 14, she was auditing college courses at Johns Hopkins, sitting in the back row and rarely speaking but acing every exam. The professors called her a prodigy. The other students called her strange. Marie didn't care what anyone called her. She had found her purpose. She passed the bar exam at 19, one of the youngest people in Maryland history to do so. The media loved the story, the brilliant young black woman from a working-class neighborhood who had conquered the legal world before she could legally drink. Job offers poured in from prestigious firms, but Marie turned them all down. She wanted to prosecute criminals, not defend corporations. She joined the U.S. Attorney's office and quickly made a name for herself. At 23, she led the prosecution that dismantled the Castellano crime family's East Coast operations, securing convictions for racketeering, money laundering, and 3 counts of murder. At 26, she took down a corrupt police union that had been covering up evidence and framing innocent suspects for years. Her conviction rate was flawless. Her reputation was golden. And then came the Moretti case. Vincent Moretti was a kingpin who had evaded prosecution for 2 decades, running drug operations, illegal gambling, and contract killings through a network of shell companies and political connections that seemed impenetrable. Marie spent 18 months building a case against him, piecing together financial records, flipping witnesses, and exposing the web of corruption that protected him. When the trial ended, Moretti was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 12 members of his organization went down with him. Marie thought it was over. She thought justice had been served. 3 weeks after the sentencing, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but a message was left on her bathroom mirror in red lipstick: "We know where you sleep." 2 weeks after that, her grandmother's house was vandalized. Evelyn was unharmed, but the message was clear. 1 week later, Marie's car brakes failed on the highway. She survived, but the mechanic found evidence of tampering. The FBI offered her witness protection, but Marie refused. She couldn't spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, living under a fake name in some small town where she couldn't practice law. Instead, she made a different choice. She would disappear in plain sight. She changed her appearance, stopped using her real credentials, and moved to a city where no one knew her face. She took a position at a small legal aid clinic under an alias, handling cases that would never make headlines: landlord disputes, wage theft, small claims. The work was unglamorous, but it was real. She was helping people who had nowhere else to turn, and she was doing it without attracting the attention that had nearly cost her everything. For 3 years, she kept her head down. She won cases quietly, never drawing media attention, never revealing who she really was. Her former colleagues assumed she had burned out and left the profession. The criminals who wanted her dead assumed she had gone into hiding somewhere far away. But Marie hadn't left. She had simply learned to be invisible. She told herself it was temporary, that one day she would return to the high-profile cases that had defined her career. But as the months turned into years, she began to wonder if she had lost herself in the process of staying safe. She was still practicing law, still fighting for justice, but she was doing it in the shadows, buried under an identity that felt less real with each passing day. And then Dolores walked into the community center, clutching an eviction notice and crying about a company called Harmony Solutions. Marie saw the name on the paperwork and felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years: recognition. Not of the company, but of the pattern. Shell corporations. Fabricated violations. Legal intimidation designed to force vulnerable people out of their homes. It was the same playbook she had seen the Castellanos and the Morettis use, just in a different context. She pulled the thread, and the more she pulled, the more it unraveled. Harmony Solutions led to a law firm. The law firm led to real estate acquisitions. The acquisitions all had one thing in common: they had been approved by Judge Luis Davis. Marie knew what she had to do. She could have referred the case to another attorney, someone who could handle it without risk. But she also knew that if Davis was as connected as she suspected, no ordinary lawyer would stand a chance. This case required someone who understood how organized crime operated, someone who could see the bigger picture and connect the dots that others would miss. It required someone like her. So Marie made a choice. She would take the case, but she would keep her identity hidden for as long as possible. She would gather evidence, build an airtight argument, and only reveal who she was when the moment was right. She didn't know yet that Judge Luis Davis was not just corrupt. She didn't know that he was the linchpin holding together a criminal empire that stretched across the city, or that taking him on would put her back in the crosshairs of the exact kind of danger she had been running from. All she knew was that someone needed to stop him. And Marie Gilmore had never walked away from a fight she believed she could win. Marie spent 3 nights in her cramped apartment, surrounded by documents that painted a picture most people would never see. Property records covered her coffee table. Corporate filings were spread across her couch. Bank statements, zoning applications, and court dockets created a paper trail that snaked from her kitchen counter to her bedroom door. To anyone else, it would have looked like chaos. To Marie, it was a map. Harmony Solutions had purchased the building where Dolores and 30 other families lived for $2.3 million. The sale had been approved without the usual environmental reviews or community hearings, rushed through by a city council member who had since resigned under mysterious circumstances. The company claimed it planned to renovate the building and bring it up to code, but the eviction notices told a different story. They wanted the tenants gone, and they wanted them gone fast. Marie dug deeper. Harmony Solutions was registered in Delaware, a common tactic for hiding ownership. The listed address was a registered agent service, the kind of place that existed only on paper. But buried in the filing documents was a name she recognized, Mitchell Crane, a corporate attorney whose firm, Crane and Associates, had handled dozens of similar transactions across the city. She pulled up every case Crane's firm had worked on in the past 5 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Low-income buildings purchased by shell companies. Tenants evicted on dubious grounds. Properties left vacant for months, then sold to developers at 3 or 4 times the purchase price. And every single case had been heard by the same judge, Luis Davis. Marie leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just corruption. This was a system, a machine designed to extract wealth from the poorest neighborhoods and funnel it into the pockets of people who already had more than they needed. But there was something else, something that nagged at her. She opened her laptop and started searching for the developers who had ultimately purchased the properties after Harmony Solutions and its sibling companies had cleared out the tenants. The names were different, but the ownership structures were eerily similar. Shell companies within shell companies, each one a Russian nesting doll designed to obscure the truth. Then she found it. Buried in a footnote of a zoning variance application was a reference to a limited liability company called Apex Holdings. Marie ran the name through every database she could access. Apex Holdings had purchased 8 properties in the past 2 years, all of them formerly owned by companies like Harmony Solutions, all of them approved by Judge Davis. The company was registered in the Cayman Islands, but the registered agent listed a mailing address in the city. Marie pulled up a map and marked every property that had been part of this pipeline. They formed a corridor stretching through 3 neighborhoods, each one poor, each one predominantly Black and Latino, each one sitting on land that developers had been eyeing for years. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone was clearing out entire communities, block by block, and using the courts to make it legal. She needed to know who was behind Apex Holdings. The Cayman Islands filing was a dead end, designed to be impenetrable. But Marie had learned over the years that every organization, no matter how careful, left breadcrumbs. She just had to know where to look. She called Malcolm Reed, her old mentor, the next morning. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Marie. Do you know what time it is?" "I need a favor," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "I need you to run a name through your contacts." quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Malcolm had been in the game long enough to know when someone was walking into dangerous territory. "What name?" he asked finally. "Apex Holdings. Cayman Islands registration. I need to know who really owns it." Another pause. Longer this time. "Marie, if you're asking me about offshore companies and you're keeping your voice this calm, you're in over your head. What are you working on?" "A landlord-tenant case," she said, which was technically true. Malcolm sighed. "I'll make some calls. But Marie, if this is what I think it is, you need to be careful. People who hide their money in the Caymans don't play nice when someone starts asking questions." "I know," Marie said softly. "Just find out what you can." She hung up and stared at the map on her wall, at the constellation of properties that told a story of greed and displacement. Somewhere in this web was Judge Luis Davis, using his gavel not to dispense justice but to legitimize theft. And somewhere beyond him, hidden behind layers of corporate anonymity, was the person or people who were funding the whole operation. Marie had taken down crime families before. She knew how they operated. They didn't just break the law, they twisted it, used it, made it work for them. And they always had someone on the inside. A prosecutor who looked the other way. A cop who buried evidence. A judge who made sure the right cases ended the right way. Judge Luis Davis wasn't just corrupt. He was a fixer, a key piece in a machine that was tearing apart entire communities for profit. And if Marie was right, this gentrification scheme wasn't just about real estate. It was about laundering money, moving dirty cash through legitimate channels by buying low, evicting fast, and selling high. The eviction case wasn't small. It was the tip of an iceberg, and Marie had just realized how deep the water went. She picked up her phone and texted Dolores, "We're going to win this. But I need you to trust me, no matter what happens in that courtroom." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Dolores replied, "I trust you." Marie stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. She wasn't just taking on a judge. She was taking on an entire criminal enterprise, one that had the law on its side. But she had been here before. And she had won before. She could win again. The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale air, the kind of place where justice was supposed to be blind but rarely was. Marie arrived 30 minutes early, taking a seat at the plaintiff's table with her worn leather satchel and a stack of meticulously organized files. She had dressed deliberately that morning, a navy blazer she had bought at a thrift store, a white blouse, and simple black slacks. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention. She wanted to blend in, to be underestimated, to let Judge Davis think she was exactly what she appeared to be. Dolores sat beside her, fidgeting with her hands. The other tenants filled the gallery behind them, their faces tight with worry. Across the aisle, the corporate attorney from Crane and Associates, a man named Richard Pemberton, sat with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost. He barely glanced at Marie, dismissing her presence the way someone might dismiss a fly. When Judge Luis Davis entered, the bailiff called out, "All rise," and the room stood in unison. Davis walked to the bench with the swagger of a man who owned the room, his black robe flowing behind him like a cape. He was younger than Marie had expected, maybe 50, with slicked-back dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. The tattoos on his hands, barely visible beneath his sleeves, told a story that his judicial robe tried to hide. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with barely concealed disdain. His gaze landed on Marie and lingered there, his expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to amusement. "Counsel, state your appearances for the record," he said, his voice smooth but edged with mockery. Pemberton stood first. "Richard Pemberton, Your Honor, representing Harmony Solutions." Marie rose slowly, keeping her voice even. "Marie Gilmore, Your Honor, representing the tenants." Davis raised an eyebrow. "And where exactly did you get your law degree, Ms. Gilmore?" "Online." A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Marie kept her expression neutral, refusing to take the bait. "I'm licensed to practice in this jurisdiction, Your Honor. My credentials are on file with the court." "Your credentials," Davis repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Tell me, Ms. Gilmore, how many eviction cases have you handled?" "Several, Your Honor." "Several." He drew out the word, savoring it. "And how many of those did you win?" Marie met his gaze directly. "All of them." The judge's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, sharper this time. "Well, there's a first time for everything. Mr. Pemberton, please proceed with your opening statement." Pemberton stood and launched into a well-rehearsed speech about property rights and lease violations, his voice dripping with the kind of legal language designed to intimidate people who didn't speak the law fluently. He painted the tenants as negligent, as people who had violated their agreements and now refused to accept the consequences. He made Harmony Solutions sound like a benevolent company trying to improve the neighborhood, forced to take action against tenants who had left them no choice. When it was Marie's turn, she stood and walked to the center of the room. She didn't use notes. She didn't need them. "Your Honor, the defense's argument rests on a single premise, that my clients violated their lease agreements. But when we examine the evidence, that premise collapses." She pulled a document from her satchel and held it up. "This is the lease agreement signed by Mrs. Dolores Martinez. Section 4, subsection 2, clearly states that tenants are permitted to have immediate family members living in the unit. Harmony Solutions claims Mrs. Martinez violated this clause by having her grandchildren stay with her. But her grandchildren are immediate family, which means there was no violation." Davis waved his hand dismissively. "Ms. Gilmore, we don't need a dramatic reading of the lease. Mr. Pemberton has already established." "With respect, Your Honor, Mr. Pemberton established nothing. He made claims. I'm providing evidence." The judge's face darkened. "Watch your tone, counsel." Marie didn't flinch. "I apologize if my tone was inappropriate, Your Honor. I'm simply pointing out that the eviction notice cites violations that don't exist under the terms of the lease." She moved to the next point, methodically dismantling Pemberton's arguments one by one. Every claim he had made about late payments, she countered with bank statements showing on-time transactions. Every accusation of property damage, she refuted with inspection reports that showed normal wear and tear. Every assertion that the tenants had been given proper notice, she challenged with certified mail receipts proving they had not. Davis interrupted her repeatedly, his irritation growing with each objection. "Ms. Gilmore, I think we all understand your position. You're claiming your clients are innocent of everything." "No, Your Honor. I'm proving it." "Proving it," he repeated, his voice thick with scorn. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her blazer. "Tell me, Ms. Gilmore, did you buy that jacket at the same place you learned to practice law? Because neither one looks particularly professional." The courtroom went silent. Even Pemberton looked uncomfortable. Marie stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her. "Your Honor, I'm not here to discuss my wardrobe. I'm here to represent my clients, who are being unlawfully evicted from their homes. Unlawfully, Davis said, his voice rising. You stand in my courtroom, in that cheap blazer, with that attitude, and you have the audacity to tell me what's lawful. I'm telling you what the evidence shows, Your Honor. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Marie saw something dangerous flash across his face. You know what I think, Ms. Gilmore. I think you walked in here thinking you could play lawyer, thinking you could stand up for these people and make yourself feel important. But this isn't a game. This is my courtroom, and I decide what happens here. Marie's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm. The law decides what happens here, Your Honor. Not any one person. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge neither of them could ignore. Davis leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. Let me make something very clear to you. You can cite all the lease agreements and bank statements you want, but at the end of the day, I'm the one wearing the robe. And if you think you're going to win this case by lecturing me about the law, you're even more naive than you look. Marie held his gaze, refusing to look away. She could feel the weight of his corruption pressing down on the room, the unspoken threat beneath his words. But she also knew something he didn't. Every word he spoke, every sneer, every dismissive comment was building her case against him. Not just for this eviction, but for everything he had done. Your Honor, she said quietly, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to ensure my clients receive a fair hearing. That's all I'm asking for. Davis stared at her for a long moment, then waved his hand as if swatting away an insect. We'll take a recess. I need to review these so-called documents you've presented. He stood abruptly and disappeared into his chambers, leaving the courtroom buzzing with whispers. Dolores grabbed Marie's arm, her voice shaking. He hates you. He's going to rule against us just to spite you. Marie turned to her and smiled, a small, knowing smile. He hates me because I'm winning. And he knows it. Marie sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, her laptop open in front of her, waiting. The hearing had been adjourned for 2 days while Judge Davis claimed he needed time to review the evidence. Marie knew what he was really doing, buying time to figure out how to rule against her without making it too obvious. But those 2 days also gave her time to dig deeper, and she wasn't going to waste it. The door chimed, and a woman in her early 30s walked in, scanning the room before her eyes landed on Marie. She wore ripped jeans, a leather jacket, and had her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked more like she belonged at a rock concert than in a conversation about corporate fraud, but Marie knew better than to judge by appearances. The woman slid into the seat across from her without a word of greeting. You must be desperate if you're calling me. Marie allowed herself a small smile. Hello, Zara. Zara Kim had been a digital forensics expert for the FBI before she got tired of bureaucracy and went freelance. She was one of the best in the business, someone who could trace money through a dozen shell companies and pull digital fingerprints from systems people thought were secure. Marie had worked with her on the Moretti case, and Zara had been the one who cracked the encrypted files that brought down the entire operation. I need you to look at something, Marie said, sliding a flash drive across the table. Harmony Solutions. Cayman Islands registration. I need to know who owns it, who funds it, and where the money goes. Zara picked up the drive and examined it like it might explode. You know my rates have gone up since we last worked together. I'll pay you when this is over, Marie said. That's what you said about the drinks you owe me from 3 years ago. I'm serious, Zara. Zara's expression softened slightly. She pocketed the drive and leaned back in her chair. What are you into this time? And don't tell me it's just a landlord-tenant case, because you wouldn't need me for that. Marie glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was paying attention to them. I think there's a judge using shell companies to launder money through real estate. He's evicting tenants, flipping properties, and funneling profits somewhere. I just don't know where yet. Zara whistled low under her breath. A judge. That's a new one. You really know how to pick your enemies. I didn't pick him. He picked himself when he decided to destroy people's lives for profit. Fair enough. Zara pulled out her own laptop and opened it. Give me what you have so far. Names, dates, transactions, anything. Marie spent the next 20 minutes walking Zara through everything she had uncovered. The pattern of purchases. The evictions. The sales to developers. The network of shell companies that all seem to connect back to Apex Holdings. Zara listened intently, typing notes as Marie spoke, her eyes darting across the screen as she cross-referenced information in real time. This is sophisticated, Zara said finally. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. Multiple layers of corporate entities, offshore accounts, different jurisdictions. They're trying to make it impossible to trace. But not impossible for you, Marie said. Zara grinned. Not impossible for me. She worked in silence for a while, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Marie watched as lines of code scrolled across the screen, as Zara navigated through databases and servers that Marie didn't even know existed. It was like watching a surgeon perform an operation, each movement precise and deliberate. Okay, Zara said after what felt like an eternity. I found something. Harmony Solutions has a single bank account in the Caymans, but all the transactions flow through a holding company called Apex Holdings. You already knew that part. But here's where it gets interesting. She turned the laptop so Marie could see the screen. Apex Holdings has 3 primary shareholders. 2 of them are other shell companies, probably designed to hide the real owners. But the third one is registered to a law firm right here in the city. Crane and Associates. Marie's breath caught. Mitchell Crane's firm. The same Mitchell Crane who's been handling all these property transactions, Zara confirmed. But wait, it gets better. I pulled the wire transfer records from the past 2 years. Apex Holdings has been receiving regular deposits from an account registered to something called the Judicial Retirement Fund. Marie frowned. That sounds like a legitimate government account. It does, doesn't it? Except it's not. I cross-referenced it with the State Comptroller's office. There's no Judicial Retirement Fund registered in this state. It's a fake, created to look official so no one would question where the money was coming from. Where is the money really coming from? Zara's fingers danced across the keyboard again, pulling up another screen. That's the million-dollar question. The deposits into the fake Judicial Retirement Fund come from multiple sources. Cash deposits at different banks, wire transfers from overseas accounts, even cryptocurrency conversions. Classic money laundering patterns. Whoever is behind this is taking dirty money and cleaning it through real estate. Marie stared at the screen, her mind racing. And Judge Davis is signing off on all the property transfers. He's not just corrupt. He's the gatekeeper. He makes sure the evictions go through, the properties get sold, and the money keeps flowing. Exactly. And if I had to guess, he's getting a cut. Probably a nice one. Zara closed her laptop and looked at Marie seriously. You know what this means, right? You're not just up against a dirty judge. You're up against an organized crime operation. The kind that doesn't hesitate to eliminate problems. Marie nodded slowly. She had known it was bad, but seeing it laid out in black and white made it real in a way that speculation never could. Judge Luis Davis wasn't just bending the rules. He was part of a machine designed to steal from the poor and enrich criminals. And she had just walked into his courtroom and challenged him in front of witnesses. "Can you document all of this?" Marie asked. "I need evidence that will hold up in federal court." Zara reopened her laptop. "Give me 48 hours. I'll get you everything you need. But Marie, you need to be careful. These people have resources. If they figure out what you're doing before you're ready to move, they'll come after you." "I know," Marie said quietly. "They already have before." Zara studied her for a moment, concern flickering across her face. "Then why are you doing this?" Marie looked out the window at the street beyond, at the people walking past without knowing that their city was being carved up and sold by criminals in suits. "Because someone has to." Zara shook her head but smiled despite herself. "You're either the bravest person I know or the most stubborn. Can't I be both?" "Yeah," Zara said, standing and shouldering her laptop bag. "You definitely can." She left the coffee shop, and Marie sat alone with her thoughts, knowing that the next 48 hours would determine everything. She had the pieces now. She just needed to put them together in a way that no one could ignore. And then she needed to survive long enough to present them. Marie was halfway up the courthouse steps when she heard the footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate, moving faster than the usual morning traffic of lawyers and litigants. She turned just as two uniformed police officers closed the distance between them, their expressions flat and professional in that particular way that meant trouble. "Marie Gilmore," the taller one asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "Yes," Marie said, her hand tightening on her satchel. "Can I help you?" "We need you to come with us, ma'am." He gestured toward the side entrance of the courthouse, away from the main doors where people were streaming in for the morning docket. Marie's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "On what grounds?" The second officer, a stocky man with a buzz cut and hard eyes, stepped closer. "We have questions about evidence tampering in relation to case number 4792. You can cooperate here, or we can make this official." Case 4792. Dolores's eviction case. Marie's mind raced through the possibilities, calculating her options. She could refuse, demand to see a warrant, make a scene on the courthouse steps where dozens of witnesses would see. But that would only delay the inevitable and might make things worse. Whatever Judge Davis had planned, he wanted her rattled, off balance, distracted from the hearing that was supposed to resume in less than an hour. "I'd like to call my attorney," Marie said. The tall officer shook his head. "You're not under arrest, ma'am. We just need to ask you some questions. Shouldn't take long if you cooperate." That was the hook. Not under arrest meant she didn't have the same protections, didn't have the right to counsel present, didn't have the leverage to push back. It was a gray area designed to intimidate without triggering constitutional safeguards. Marie glanced at her watch. She had 40 minutes before the hearing. "Fine. Let's make this quick." They led her through the side entrance and down a corridor she had never used before, past offices and storage rooms until they reached a small conference room with no windows. The tall officer gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. "What exactly am I being accused of?" she asked. A third man entered the room, and Marie's stomach dropped. Detective Raymond Holloway. She recognized him from the courthouse, had seen him testifying in cases over the past few months. He was one of Judge Davis's regular witnesses, the kind of cop who always seemed to have evidence ready exactly when the prosecution needed it. "Ms. Gilmore," Holloway said, closing the door behind him. "We've received a complaint that you submitted falsified documents in the Martinez eviction case. Specifically, bank statements that have been altered to show payments that were never made." Marie stared at him, her anger rising. "That's absurd. Every document I submitted is authentic. I have the originals, and they're backed up by the bank's own records." "Then you won't mind if we examine them," Holloway said, holding out his hand. "Your briefcase, please." This was it. This was the play. They would take her evidence, claim they needed to verify it, and by the time she got it back, the hearing would be over and Judge Davis would have ruled against her clients by default. Or worse, they would actually tamper with her documents and then accuse her of the very crime they were committing. "No," Marie said flatly. Holloway's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" "I said no. You don't have a warrant. I'm not under arrest. And you have no legal authority to seize my property without probable cause. What you have is a baseless accusation, and I'm not stupid enough to hand over my case files so you can make them disappear." The stocky officer moved toward her, his hand resting on his belt near his handcuffs. "Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." Marie pulled her phone from her pocket. "Then we're doing it the hard way. I'm calling the State Bar's ethics hotline, and I'm filing a complaint about police harassment of an attorney in the middle of active litigation. I'm also recording this conversation as of right now." She held up her phone, the recording app clearly visible on the screen. The three men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. "You're making a mistake," Holloway said, his voice low. "No, detective. You're making a mistake. And when this is over, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who put you up to it." Holloway's jaw clenched. For a moment, Marie thought he might actually arrest her, might escalate this into something she couldn't talk her way out of. But then he stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Have it your way, counselor. But don't say we didn't warn you. Judge Davis takes evidence tampering very seriously. If those documents turn out to be fake, you're going to lose a lot more than this case." "They're not fake," Marie said. "And we both know it." She walked past them and out the door, her legs shaking but her stride confident. She didn't look back, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. But as soon as she rounded the corner, she leaned against the wall and took a shaky breath. They were trying to intimidate her, trying to make her back down or make a mistake. Judge Davis knew she was getting too close, knew that she had evidence that could unravel everything. So he was using every tool at his disposal, including the police who were supposed to be protecting the public, not harassing attorneys who threatened his criminal enterprise. Marie checked her watch. 25 minutes until the hearing. She needed to pull herself together, needed to walk back into that courtroom like nothing had happened. But her hands were still trembling when she pulled out her phone and texted Zara. "They just tried to take my evidence. I need that documentation ASAP. This is moving faster than I thought." 3 dots appeared, then Zara's response, "Working on it. Be careful. These people are scared of you, which makes them dangerous." Marie typed back, "I know. But I'm not backing down." She pushed off the wall and headed toward the courtroom, toward Judge Davis and whatever trap he had waiting for her next. Her satchel felt heavier than usual, weighted with the evidence that could bring down a criminal empire if she could just survive long enough to present it. The game had changed. Judge Davis wasn't just trying to win the case anymore. He was trying to destroy her. And Marie knew that meant she was closer to the truth than he could afford to let her get. She climbed the stairs to the courtroom, her jaw set with determination. They had made their move. Now it was her turn. And she was just getting started. The hearing had been postponed again. Judge Davis claimed he needed more time to review the defense's objections, but Marie knew it was just another stalling tactic. He was buying time, trying to figure out how to bury her without making it too obvious. She had expected it, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. Marie left the courthouse just after 6 in the evening, when the building was mostly empty and the parking lot had cleared out. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. She walked quickly toward her car, her keys already in her hand, her satchel heavy against her shoulder. She was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, and all she wanted was to get home, review Zara's latest findings, and prepare for whatever came next. She was 3 cars away from her sedan when she heard the footsteps. Not the casual footsteps of someone heading to their own vehicle, but deliberate, purposeful, closing the distance between them. Marie's training kicked in immediately. She turned, her hand tightening around her keys, positioning them between her fingers like a makeshift weapon. A man stood 10 feet away, blocking her path to the car. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of physical work. He wore dark jeans, a black leather jacket, and had a face that looked like it had been broken and reassembled more than once. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of someone who had done things most people couldn't imagine. "Marie Gilmore," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. It wasn't a question. "Do I know you?" Marie asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "No, but I know you. Lucas Harper." He didn't extend his hand, didn't make any gesture of civility. "I work for people who are very interested in your case." Marie's mind raced. Lucas Harper. She had heard the name before, whispered in the corridors of federal courthouses when she was still a prosecutor. He was a private investigator, at least on paper. In reality, he was an enforcer, someone criminals hired when they needed problems to disappear quietly. He had never been convicted of anything, but everyone in law enforcement knew what he was. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," Marie said, trying to step around him. He moved to block her path, not touching her but making it clear she wasn't leaving until he was done talking. "You should be. See, I've been watching you, Ms. Gilmore. Watching you dig into things that don't concern you. Watching you ask questions about companies and people who value their privacy." "I'm representing my clients," Marie said. "That's not a crime." "No, it's not. But it can be dangerous." He took a step closer, and Marie instinctively backed up against the car behind her. "You're a smart woman. Smart enough to know when you're in over your head. So let me make this simple for you. Drop the case. Tell your clients you can't help them anymore. Walk away, and nobody gets hurt." "And if I don't?" Marie asked, her heart hammering in her chest. Lucas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I stop being polite. See, the people I work for, they don't like loose ends. They don't like people who cause problems. And right now, Ms. Gilmore, you're causing a lot of problems." He reached into his jacket pocket, and Marie's body tensed, ready to run or fight or scream. But he pulled out a photograph and held it up so she could see it. The blood drained from her face. It was a picture of her apartment building. Not just the building, but her specific window, taken from the street below. Someone had been watching her. tracking her movements, documenting where she lived. That's just so you understand I'm serious, Lucas said, tucking the photo back into his pocket. I know where you sleep, Ms. Gilmore. I know where you buy your coffee. I know the route you take to the courthouse every morning. And if I know it, other people can know it too. People who aren't as reasonable as I am. Marie forced herself to breathe, to think through the fear threatening to paralyze her. This was what they wanted. They wanted her terrified, wanted her to make a mistake or give up. But she had been here before. After the Moretti case, after the threats and the attacks, she had survived by refusing to let fear control her. I'm not dropping the case, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Lucas's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. He studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his cold eyes. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't stop a bullet. It won't stop your brake lines from being cut. It won't stop someone from following you home one night and making sure you never make it inside. Are you threatening to kill me? Marie asked, pulling her phone from her pocket. Because if you are, I should let you know I'm recording this conversation. Lucas glanced at the phone and laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty parking lot. I'm not threatening you, Ms. Gilmore. I'm warning you. There's a difference. I'm giving you a chance to walk away before things get messy. Most people don't get that courtesy. Consider your warning delivered, Marie said. Now get out of my way. He didn't move immediately, just stood there watching her with those dead eyes. Then, finally, he stepped aside. Your funeral, he said softly. Marie walked past him, her legs shaking, her keys clutched so tightly they cut into her palm. She got into her car, locked the doors, and started the engine with trembling hands. Lucas Harper stood in the parking lot, watching her, his silhouette dark against the fading light. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove 3 blocks before she had to pull over, her hands shaking too badly to keep driving safely. She sat there in the gathering darkness, her phone in her lap, trying to decide who to call. The police wouldn't help, not when Judge Davis controlled half of them. The FBI would want evidence she didn't have yet. Malcolm would tell her to back off, to let someone else handle it. But there was no one else. There was only her, and a case that had just become a matter of life and death. Marie took a deep breath, pulled herself together, and drove home. She had decisions to make, and not much time to make them. Because Lucas Harper wasn't bluffing. She had seen enough men like him to know that his warnings were promises. The question now was whether she was willing to die for justice. And as she pulled into her apartment complex and looked up at her window, remembering the photograph, she realized she already knew the answer. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case, about the attorney taking on Judge Davis, about the delays and the drama. Reporters sat in the back rows, their notebooks ready. Community activists filled the gallery, some wearing shirts that read, "Justice for Dolores." Even other attorneys had shown up, curious to see how this would end. Marie sat at the plaintiff's table with a calm she didn't entirely feel. Her satchel was on the floor beside her, but today she also had a laptop, something she rarely brought to court. Dolores sat beside her, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Behind them, the other tenants waited with the kind of desperate hope that came from having nowhere else to turn. Judge Luis Davis entered, and Marie noticed something different about him. The swagger was still there, but there was tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes. He knew something was coming. Lucas Harper had probably reported back that she hadn't backed down, that the warnings hadn't worked. Davis was a man who was used to controlling every variable, and Marie had become the variable he couldn't control. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Davis settled into his chair and looked directly at Marie. "Ms. Gilmore, I trust you're ready to conclude this matter today. This court has been more than patient with your theatrics." Marie stood slowly. "Your Honor, I'm ready to present conclusive evidence that will resolve this case definitively." "Conclusive," Davis repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "By all means, counsel. Let's hear what you consider conclusive." Marie opened her laptop and connected it to the courtroom's display system. The screen behind the judge flickered to life, and she pulled up the first document. It was one of the eviction notices sent to Dolores, the one claiming she had violated the lease by failing to pay rent for 3 consecutive months. "Your Honor, the defense has repeatedly claimed that Mrs. Martinez failed to pay rent. They've submitted what they claim are records from their accounting system showing no payments received during June, July, and August of last year." Pemberton stood. "Your Honor, we've already established this. The plaintiff's alleged bank statements don't." "Please let me finish, Mr. Pemberton," Marie said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not talking about bank statements. I'm talking about metadata." She clicked to the next slide, and a detailed breakdown of a digital file appeared on the screen. "This is the eviction notice that was filed with the court, claiming Mrs. Martinez violated her lease. According to the document's metadata, it was created on September 15 of last year and last modified on September 16. Davis leaned forward. "So what? Someone drafted it and made revisions. That's standard." "It would be standard, Your Honor, except for one problem." Marie clicked again, and another document appeared. "This is Mrs. Martinez's payment record from Harmony Solutions' own accounting system, obtained through a legal discovery request. According to this document's metadata, it was created on August 1 and last modified on October 3. 3 weeks after the eviction notice was filed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Pemberton's face had gone pale. Marie continued, her voice steady. "The defense claimed this payment record was generated automatically by their accounting software. But metadata doesn't lie. Someone accessed this file on October 3 and modified it to remove Mrs. Martinez's payment entries for June, July, and August. They did this after the eviction notice had already been filed, which means the original eviction notice was based on false information." "Objection," Pemberton said, his voice strained. "Your Honor, this is speculation. Metadata can be manipulated." "Which is exactly what I thought," Marie interrupted. "So I had a digital forensics expert examine both documents." She clicked to the next slide, showing Zara's detailed analysis. The modifications were made from a specific IP address registered to Crane and Associates. More specifically, from Mr. Pemberton's own computer. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. The tenants gasped. Davis slammed his gavel, but the noise continued. Marie raised her voice slightly. "But that's not all, Your Honor. I also obtained the server logs from Harmony Solutions' payment processing system. These logs show that Mrs. Martinez's payments were received and processed on time every single month, including June, July, and August. The payments were acknowledged by the system, deposited into Harmony Solutions' bank account, and then later deleted from the client-facing records." She pulled up bank statements from Harmony Solutions, with specific transactions highlighted. "These deposits match Mrs. Martinez's payment amounts exactly, down to the cent someone at Harmony Solutions received her money, deposited it, and then altered their records to claim she hadn't paid. That's not a violation of the lease, Your Honor. That's fraud. Davis's face had turned a dark shade of red. Ms. Gilmore, these are serious allegations. Yes, they are, Your Honor. And I have more. Marie clicked to another slide showing a series of email exchanges. These are internal emails from Crane and Associates, also obtained through discovery. In them, Mr. Pemberton discusses modifying client payment records to create grounds for eviction. He specifically mentions that the properties need to be cleared quickly to meet a deadline for a sale to Apex Holdings. She zoomed in on one particular email. In this message, Mr. Pemberton writes, and I quote, "Judge Davis has assured me the evictions will be approved regardless of the evidence. Just make sure the paperwork looks clean enough to avoid appeals." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Every eye turned to Judge Davis, whose face had gone from red to ashen. "Your Honor," Marie said quietly, "this isn't a landlord-tenant dispute. This is a criminal conspiracy to defraud tenants and illegally seize their homes. And according to these documents, you're not just presiding over this case. You're participating in it." Davis's hand trembled as he reached for his gavel. "This court is in recess. I'm not finished, Your Honor." Marie's voice cut through the room like a blade. "I've also provided copies of all this evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Federal investigators are currently executing search warrants at Harmony Solutions, Crane and Associates, and Apex Holdings. They're also reviewing every case you've presided over in the past 5 years to determine the full extent of this conspiracy." She closed her laptop and looked directly at the judge. "So you can adjourn this hearing if you want, Your Honor. But it won't matter. The evidence speaks for itself. My clients are innocent. You are not." Davis sat frozen in his chair, his gavel still raised, his mouth open but no words coming out. Behind him, the courtroom door opened, and Marie saw what she had been waiting for. Federal agents in suits, their badges visible, moving purposefully toward the bench. The lead agent, a woman Marie recognized from her prosecutor days, stepped forward. "Judge Luis Davis, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of racketeering, money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. You need to come with us." Davis looked at Marie, and in his eyes she saw something she had never expected to see from him, fear. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "I'm a judge. You can't just." "Stand up and place your hands behind your back," the agent said, her voice leaving no room for argument. As the agents moved to arrest him, Davis's gaze locked on Marie one last time. There was hatred there, and rage, but also something else. Recognition. He finally understood who she really was, what she was capable of, and that he had underestimated her from the very beginning. Marie watched as they led him away in handcuffs, his black robe seeming to shrink around him as his authority dissolved. The courtroom remained silent except for the sound of his footsteps echoing down the corridor. When he was gone, Marie turned to Dolores, who was crying openly, her hands covering her face. "Is it over?" Dolores whispered. "Is it really over?" Marie put a hand on her shoulder. "Yes. It's over. You get to keep your home." Around them, the courtroom erupted into cheers and applause. But Marie barely heard it. She was already thinking about what came next, about the other victims of Davis's corruption, about the system that had allowed someone like him to thrive for so long. The battle was won. But the war for justice was far from over. The courtroom had descended into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Spectators were on their feet. Pemberton was frantically packing his briefcase, his face the color of chalk. Judge Davis sat motionless at the bench, his gavel still clutched in his hand, staring at the laptop screen that had just destroyed his carefully constructed empire. "Order," he said weakly, but no one was listening. "Order in this court." Marie remained standing at the plaintiff's table, her eyes fixed on the courtroom doors. She had timed this perfectly. She had sent Zara's complete forensic report to the U.S. Attorney's Office 2 days ago, had coordinated with federal investigators to ensure they had everything they needed for warrants. She had told them exactly when she would present the evidence in court, exactly when Judge Davis would be trapped in a room full of witnesses with no way to run. The doors burst open. 6 federal agents entered, their badges displayed on chains around their necks, their presence commanding immediate silence. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that brooked no nonsense. Special Agent Diane Foster. Marie recognized her from her prosecutor days, had worked with her on the Moretti case. Foster had been the one who helped coordinate Marie's safety after the threats began. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Foster gave an almost imperceptible nod. A silent acknowledgement between 2 women who had dedicated their lives to dismantling corruption. "Judge Louise Davis," Foster said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor, 4 agents flanking her. "I'm Special Agent Diane Foster with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest." Davis finally seemed to come back to life. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous. I'm a sitting judge. You can't just walk into my courtroom." "Your courtroom?" Foster interrupted, stopping at the bar that separated the gallery from the well of the court. "Sir, this courtroom belongs to the people. And you've been using it to commit federal crimes." She held up a document. "This is a warrant for your arrest on charges of racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, perjury, and obstruction of justice. You need to step down from the bench and come with us." "I demand to see my attorney," Davis said, but his voice cracked. The authority he had wielded so easily for years was evaporating before everyone's eyes. "You'll have that opportunity," Foster said. "But right now, you need to comply with this warrant. Step down from the bench, Judge Davis." For a moment, Marie thought he might actually try to run. His eyes darted toward the door to his chambers, calculating whether he could make it. But 2 agents had already moved to block that exit, their hands resting casually on their service weapons. Davis's shoulders sagged. He set down his gavel with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through the courtroom like a death knell. He stepped down from the bench, and the moment his feet touched the floor, he seemed to shrink. Without the elevation of the bench, without the black robe and the gavel and the power of the state behind him, he was just a man. A criminal in an expensive suit. One of the agents moved forward with handcuffs. Davis flinched. "Is that really necessary?" he asked, a note of pleading entering his voice. "Standard procedure for felony arrests," Foster said without sympathy. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Davis complied, and the click of the handcuffs seemed impossibly loud in the silent courtroom. The agent read him his Miranda rights, the words that Davis himself had heard recited thousands of times in his years on the bench, now being spoken for his benefit. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marie watched as the realization settled over him. This was real. This was happening. Years of corruption, of using his position to enrich himself and his criminal associates, of destroying lives for profit, it was all catching up to him in this single, devastating moment. As the agents prepared to lead him out, Davis turned and looked directly at Marie. The hatred in his eyes was palpable, burning with an intensity that made several people in the courtroom take a step back. But beneath the hatred, Marie saw something else. Fear. The fear of a man who had always believed he was untouchable, now realizing he had been wrong. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You think this ends with me? You think I'm the only one?" "No," Marie said calmly. "I know you're not. But you're the first. And everyone else is about to fall just like you did." Davis's face twisted with rage. "They'll come for you. You know that, don't you? The people I work with, they don't forgive. They don't forget. You've signed your own death warrant." Foster stepped between them. "That sounds like a threat, Judge Davis. Should I add witness intimidation to your charges?" Davis fell silent, but his eyes remained locked on Marie as the agents began to lead him away. The gallery parted to let them through, people pressing against the walls as if afraid to get too close to him. Some watched with satisfaction. Others with shock. A few with fear, wondering if they had unknowingly participated in his schemes. As Davis reached the courtroom doors, he stopped and turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Ms. Gilmore." "Yes," Marie said quietly. "It is." The agents pulled him through the doors, and then he was gone. The courtroom remained frozen for a long moment, as if everyone was afraid to move, afraid that speaking would break whatever spell had just been cast. Then Dolores grabbed Marie's hand and squeezed it tight. "You did it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You actually did it." The courtroom erupted. Cheers, applause, people embracing each other. The tenants were crying, celebrating, overcome with relief and joy. Reporters were rushing out to file their stories, their phones already pressed to their ears. Other attorneys stood stunned, realizing they had just witnessed history. But Marie barely heard any of it. She was looking at the empty bench, at the gavel Davis had left behind, at the chair where he had sat in judgment over so many people while being the most guilty person in the room. Foster approached her, a slight smile on her face. "That was impressive, counselor. The way you laid out the evidence, the timing of bringing it all together. You haven't lost your touch." "Thank you for moving so quickly on the warrants," Marie said. "Thank you for handing us a case so airtight even his expensive lawyers won't be able to wriggle out of it." Foster's expression grew more serious. "But Marie, you need to be careful. Davis was right about one thing. He wasn't working alone. We're going after his associates, but it's going to take time. Until then, you need to watch your back." "I know," Marie said. "I've been watching my back for 3 years." Foster nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, it's good to see you back in the fight. We missed you." She walked away, and Marie stood alone in the chaos, feeling the weight of what she had just done settling over her. She had won. Davis was in custody. Her clients were safe. Justice had been served. But as the courtroom slowly emptied and the reality of Foster's warning sank in, Marie knew this was just the beginning. She had pulled one thread and the entire system had started to unravel. Now she had to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The gavel had fallen. But the real work was just beginning. 3 months after Judge Luis Davis was led out of his courtroom in handcuffs, Marie stood in front of a room full of reporters, activists, and attorneys. The press conference was being held at the community center where she had first met Dolores, the same place where she had decided to take on a case that would change everything. The room was packed, cameras lined the back wall, and microphones crowded the small podium where Marie stood. She had spent those 3 months working with federal investigators, helping them unravel the full extent of Davis's criminal enterprise. The investigation had expanded far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. 12 other judges across 3 states were now under investigation. Apex Holdings had been revealed as a front for a criminal organization that had been operating for nearly a decade. Mitchell Crane and 4 other attorneys had been indicted. The properties that had been illegally seized were being returned to their rightful owners, and victims were finally getting their day in court. But Marie knew that prosecuting individual criminals wasn't enough. The system that had allowed Davis to thrive for so long was still intact, still vulnerable to the next corrupt official who learned to exploit it. She had spent her entire career fighting battles one case at a time, and she was tired of fighting the same fight over and over. It was time to change the game. "Thank you all for coming," Marie said, her voice steady as she looked out at the crowd. 3 months ago, I stood in a courtroom and exposed a judge who had been using his power to destroy lives for profit. But Judge Davis wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a much larger problem. Our judicial system, designed to protect the vulnerable, has been compromised by people who see it as an opportunity for personal gain. She paused, letting the words settle over the room. "I've spent the last 3 months working with federal investigators, and what we found is disturbing. Hundreds of cases across multiple jurisdictions where judges ruled in favor of parties who had financial connections to them. Thousands of families displaced from their homes through fraudulent evictions. Billions of dollars laundered through real estate schemes that used the courts as a rubber stamp for criminal activity." A reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Gilmore, what do you think needs to change?" Marie looked directly at the camera. "Everything. We need transparency in judicial finances. We need independent oversight of judges who consistently rule in ways that benefit specific parties. We need to make it easier for victims of judicial corruption to report it without fear of retaliation. And we need attorneys who are willing to stand up and fight, even when the system is stacked against them." She took a breath and continued. "That's why I'm announcing the formation of the Justice Collective. It's a non-profit organization dedicated to identifying, exposing, and prosecuting judicial corruption. We'll provide legal representation for victims who can't afford it. We'll train attorneys to recognize the signs of corruption and give them the tools to fight back. And we'll work with legislators to reform the systems that allow this corruption to flourish." Another reporter spoke up. "You've been working under an assumed identity for years. Why come forward now?" Marie had known this question would come. She had spent 3 years in hiding, 3 years keeping her head down and staying invisible. But the moment she decided to take on Judge Davis, she had known there was no going back. "Because hiding doesn't change anything," she said simply. "I went into hiding because I was afraid. Afraid of the people who wanted to hurt me for doing my job. But fear only works if you let it control you. And I'm done being controlled by fear." The room erupted with questions, but Marie held up her hand. "I know many of you want to know about my past, about the cases I worked on before. And I'll answer those questions, but not today. Today is about the future. Today is about building something that will outlast any one person, any one case, any one corrupt official." She gestured to the people standing behind her. Malcolm Reed, her mentor, who had come out of retirement to help her build the organization. Zara Kim, who would lead their digital forensics division. Dolores Martinez and several other tenants, who would serve on the board to ensure the organization never lost sight of the people it was meant to protect. And a dozen attorneys from across the country who had already signed on to join the fight. "The Justice Collective isn't just about me," Marie said. "It's about all of us. Every person who has ever felt powerless in the face of corruption. Every attorney who has been afraid to speak up. Every victim who thought no one would believe them. This is for all of you." She looked directly into the camera, knowing that somewhere, someone was watching. Someone who had been sitting in their living room, watching the news, thinking about the injustice they had experienced and wondering if there was any point in fighting back. "If you've been wronged by a corrupt system, we want to help you," Marie said. "If you're an attorney who wants to fight corruption but doesn't know where to start, we want to train you. If you're an investigator, a journalist, an activist who believes that justice should mean something, we want to work with you. This is bigger than any one case. This is about reclaiming our justice system from the people who have turned it into a weapon." The questions came rapid fire after that. How would they fund the organization? What legal authority would they have? Weren't they afraid of retaliation? Marie answered each one with the same calm confidence she had shown in the courtroom, the same determination that had carried her through years of hiding and fighting and surviving. When the press conference finally ended and the reporters filtered out, Marie stood with her team in the suddenly quiet room. Malcolm put a hand on her shoulder. "You know this makes you a target again," he said quietly. "Everyone who benefited from Davis's corruption, everyone who's still out there operating the same schemes, they're all going to see you as a threat." "I know," Marie said. "But I was already a target. At least now I'm a target who's fighting back." Dolores approached, her eyes bright with tears. "My grandchildren are going to grow up knowing that justice is real. Because of you." Marie shook her head. "Not because of me. Because of all of us. Because people like you were brave enough to speak up when it mattered." As the team began packing up, making plans for their first official meeting, Marie walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood. The same streets she had walked for 3 years, invisible and afraid. The same buildings where families were struggling to survive against a system designed to grind them down. But something had shifted. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, Marie felt like she was finally moving forward instead of just surviving. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. Already, messages were flooding in. Victims asking for help. Attorneys wanting to join. Journalists with tips about other corrupt officials. The work was just beginning, and it would be endless and exhausting and dangerous. But Marie Gilmore had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. She had been a prodigy who mastered the law before she could drive. She had been a prosecutor who brought down criminal empires. She had been a survivor who rebuilt herself in the shadows. And now, finally, she was ready to be something more. She was ready to be a leader. The Justice Collective was born from one woman's refusal to back down. But it would grow into something far greater than Marie had ever imagined, a movement that would reshape the fight against corruption and give hope to thousands of people who had given up on justice. And it all started with a simple choice: to stop hiding and start fighting. The gavel had fallen on Judge Davis. But Marie's work was just beginning, and she was finally ready for whatever came next. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. I've got another great story lined up for you. Click the video on your screen now to watch it next. See you there.